Nate, you're fairly unique in that I think you at least go back to Eddie's first year and maybe a year before that. I'm not sure exactly, but I think you were there when he was hired. What was your initial impression with him when he came in? Because obviously what he became and maybe what people thought at that time were two different things. I mean, done a good job at Creighton, but nobody had any idea what he was going to do over the next few years.
Well, I think the biggest thing, one thing he had in his corner was Frank Broyles. That was unheard of for a football coach in the Southwest Conference to actually go out and hire up, a big time basketball coach. Of course, Eddie was, on the rise then, but putting the whole emphasis on the program, it really had never been done before, and really hadn't been done much in the Southwest Conference period. But he made a good impression right off the bat. Did you think he was going to do exactly what he did right away? Nobody could have dreamed that. But I got there for Lanny Van Emon's last year. He went 10-16, but the year before he went 16-10 with Martin Terry. But the whole emphasis, I mean, on basketball is different. Frank was coaching football, which he did the first 2 years of Eddie's realm. But what Eddie did, they came in and just really, he got lucky in that, he had Marvin Delp, and then you had Ron and Sidney coming up afterwards. But he did such a great job with them, and he sold the program. He went out, he did the rubber chicken circuit. He'd speak at Springdale Holiday Inn, Kiwanis and clubs and that type of thing. But he got the program interested. He got a big bonus from Ken Allison, who was ironically a transfer from Western Kentucky, where Lanny Van Eman went, and they went 17-9 really because of Ken Allison, he was like a senior who he had to transfer because of some problems at Western Kentucky that weren't his own, but it took off and it became I mean, by the second year you were there and saw how it became that it was a social event. I mean, people wanted to be seen at Barnhill Arena, and I mean, it was amazing how it took off and the impact. I don't think even today people can understand how people were flying in from like Little Rock and El Dorado in the middle of a week for ball games, and it was a happening. There's no question.
Now, my timeline may be off a little bit, but I certainly remember sitting there watching a practice in Barnhill, and it was not renovated. It was Barnhill Fieldhouse. There was a dirt floor over there on the south, and you could look up at those windows, and it'd be afternoon sun would be coming in those windows, and you could see all the dust in the air. And I guess one of the best things that happened early on was because of Eddie's success. Barnhill Fieldhouse became Barnhill Arena. That was a tremendous transformation that took place.
Yeah, of course, he was promised that they would renovate it when he wasn't going to take the job unless that
Right.
was done, and seats added. And the first 2 years he was there, obviously when he got there, they certainly couldn't start renovation. And I think it was really 2 full years before they really could get it going and do the renovation that they did. Um, but no, I mean, he started from scratch as far as the facility was concerned, but he built it into what it was. I mean, there's no question. Obviously, Nolan, built onto that and then got Walton Arena, but it doesn't happen without Eddie Sutton starting it and um, making it where it was a statewide. I mean, Sidney Moncrief was more popular than Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was the governor then.
Yeah.
I think if Sidney had run, he would have won. I mean, he was a, a folk hero, and it really, other than Corliss and Scotty and that group, nothing's really approached that as far as the impact that team had. And then of course you had great players come after him. The Darrell Walkers, the Scott Hastings, and so many of them, Alvin Robertson, Joe Klein.
He really wanted the fans to understand his style of basketball, and he was always talking about trying to educate people. Not that he felt like that was the only way to coach or play, but he wanted them to understand I'm the coach here, and this is what we're trying to do. And I think he used all of us to try and help him do that. And I think what ended up happening was in Barnhill, those fans became so involved in the game and understood so much what was happening. It became an unbelievable home court advantage. I was reading I didn't realize this. I was reading today on the internet that he actually had the best home record of any coach ever at Arkansas. It was incredible. He won over 90% of his home games. And I've always felt like that in part was because those fans were just felt like they were tuned in to what they were doing. They recognized when they were making mistakes and they recognized when they were doing the right stuff. I mean, that educating the fans was kind of, I thought that was a little odd at first, but I saw the benefits of it.
Yeah, and he did it in not a condescending way, and I think that was the impact. People liked Eddie, and he related to him. Kansas isn't that far from Arkansas. I mean, he connected very well with people, and I think basically he was kind of a shy person, but he made himself as far as out with the public, said the right things to the media, especially those early years. We obviously had the problems late, his last year, but he did. I mean, all that aside, the program he built here and how he built it, because he made the fans a part of it. And then, of course, the Jim Robkin, he brought him down to to watch the Cougar Brass at Houston, and then outdid them by far. I mean, you're right. The home court advantage. They talk about it being worth 3 or 4 points. It was worth about 10 with him, with the way Barnhill was. I mean, I remember teams with Abe Lemons and them would be some of them, they wouldn't even stay in Fayetteville. They were so intimidated. I remember Guy Lewis. They went that year where they had the big snowstorm, and they flew in and they stayed in Fort Smith. Got snowed in here. Texas Tech had come in and that Monday night to play them after a Saturday game, and Houston was still trying to get out of the airport. Uh, but the Jim Robkin factor, the band, all of that, and you didn't have the way it is now, where you didn't have the message board and the stuff that actually takes the crowd out of the game. You didn't have public address announcements and commercials all the time,
Right.
and the DJs and all that really distract from the game rather than enhance it.
And he really didn't have an ego about some of this stuff. I mean, I think there were some in the media that bought into what he was saying so much that they tried to somehow draw him into some kind of a thing where he would make fun of Guy Lewis. The popular perception was that Eddie was all preparation and details, and Guy Lewis just throw the basketball out there and say, "Okay, guys, play a pickup game." And somebody made a reference to that in a press conference one day, and he pretty much lectured the guy. He said, "Look, there's no one way to coach, and that's not what Guy Lewis does. He's different from me, but he couldn't coach the way I do, and I couldn't coach the way he does. And everybody has to do it their own way, or they're not going to succeed." And I just found that pretty interesting when he said that.
Yeah, I remember anytime they played Houston, I remember he would always go, "Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat," and he would say that every time, and he was right. I mean, Nolan's style and Eddie Sutton's style were different, but they're both Hall of Fame coaches. I mean,
Right.
nobody coaches just strictly all alike, and to say, I remember there'd be debates about Eddie and Nolan. Well, that's one of the old, they're both right because obviously they both succeeded in what they did.
I'm not sure, Nate, and I said this to Bob Holt earlier, I'm not sure we understood how lucky we were in those days. The media was a lot smaller. We didn't have social media, as you pointed out, to deal with, and everything was open. And we were able to do our jobs almost unfettered back then. And the other thing was that Eddie didn't, and Frank was like this too. Eddie didn't seem to be all that upset if you did something negative on him. We've all had to do that from time to time, criticize a coach. And the few times I had to do it, he was just kind of laughing about it. It was almost like I think Frank always knew it didn't matter what I said about him. He was bigger than I was, so it didn't matter. And Eddie just kind of laughed it off when that happened. I mean, neither one of them really came after you if they felt like you had slighted them in some way.
No, their numbers were listed in the phone book. They were, they didn't hold grudges. Certainly that I saw ever, and there were times, there were things I didn't, that I would write that weren't just totally, flattering to the program and everything, and it was fine. I never had any crossways with either one of them. No, they had a very thick skin and handled, really things for 10 out of the 11 years, he handled things as well as you could.
You know, at some point I'm going to have to retire. I don't know. I'm still trying to avoid that, but when I do, I think one of the things I'm going to think back on is all those coaches I was around. You know, Frank and Eddie and John McDonald early in his career when he got that thing going with track, and then some of the guys that came afterward. We've really been very lucky in all the years that we've done. There've been a few contentious years, but not very many. We just went through a tough 2 years, but I think it's about to get better.
Yeah, the thing it's interesting with basketball. You look back, Eddie Sutton and Nolan Richardson, every practice they had, media could come to, and those guys won. We've had closed practices since, and the success rate hadn't been as high, has it?
No, I've never felt like that somehow proves something, but yeah, I think the opposite is true. But Nate, I want to thank you for joining me and thanking Bob too. I mean, these are important things to us, and I hope other people understand what those years were really like when Eddie was here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Okay.